Our story begins on a day unlike any other in our planet's long history. It was 66 million years ago, on what we now call the final day of the Cretaceous period. A giant asteroid, a mountain of rock and metal wider than any city, was hurtling through space. Its target was Earth. When it struck, near modern-day Mexico, the impact was cataclysmic. The energy released was more powerful than all the nuclear weapons on Earth combined, multiplied 1,000 times over. It tore a hole in the planet's crust over 150 kilometers wide, instantly vaporizing everything at ground zero and sending unimaginable shockwaves across the globe. This single event would draw a final dark curtain on the age of dinosaurs. The immediate effects were terrifying. The impact triggered earthquakes that shook the continents and tsunamis that washed hundreds of miles inland, scouring the coastlines clean of life. The sky itself seemed to catch fire. A searing wave of heat generated by superheated rock and debris raining back down through the atmosphere baked the surface of the planet. For any creature caught out in the open, there was no escape. This immense pulse of thermal radiation would have been hot enough to ignite forests worldwide, leading to global firestorms that consumed the lush Cretaceous landscapes. The world of the dinosaurs was ending not with a whisper but with a deafening roar and a blast of infernal heat. This was more than just a physical blow to the planet, it was an environmental catastrophe on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The force of the collision threw trillions of tons of pulverized rock, dust and soot high into the upper atmosphere. This immense cloud of debris began to spread, carried by stratospheric winds, until it formed a thick, impenetrable blanket around the entire planet. The sun, the source of all life and energy, was blotted out. Day turned into an endless twilight night. The vibrant, sun-drenched world that the dinosaurs had known for over 160 million years was plunged into a deep and profound darkness that would last for years. The consequences of this darkness were swift and brutal. With no sunlight reaching the surface, photosynthesis, the process that powers nearly all life on Earth, came to a grinding halt. Plants on land and plankton in the sea began to die off in massive numbers. The great food chains that had sustained the dinosaurs and countless other creatures collapsed from the bottom up. The herbivores that fed on the dying plants soon starved, and the carnivores that hunted them were not far behind. It was a global extinction event, a great dying that would ultimately claim 75% of all species on Earth, including, most famously, all the non-avian dinosaurs. In the months and years that followed the Great Impact, the Earth became a truly alien and hostile place. The thick shroud of dust and soot in the atmosphere did more than just block out the sun. It also triggered a dramatic and devastating plunge in global temperatures. This phenomenon, known as an impact winter, sent the planet into a deep freeze. The warm subtropical climates of the late Cretaceous were replaced by a bitter, unrelenting cold. For the creatures that had survived the initial blast and firestorms, this new, freezing world presented yet another lethal challenge. It was a world of perpetual twilight, where the only light was a faint, ghostly glow, much like a moonlit night, but lasting for years on end. Life on the surface was almost entirely extinguished. The once mighty forests were now just graveyards of charred skeletal trees. The lush ferns and flowering plants were gone, replaced by a thick layer of ash and fallout from the impact. With the death of so much life, a different kind of organism began to flourish. Fungi, which do not need sunlight to survive and thrive on decaying matter, experienced a massive boom. The fossil record from this time shows a distinct layer known as a fungal spike, a silent testament to a world covered in rot and decay. Fungi became the planet's great decomposers, breaking down the dead and helping to recycle nutrients in a world where little else could grow. For the animals that remained, it was a desperate struggle for survival in a barren wasteland. The world was eerily quiet. The thunderous footsteps of a Tyrannosaurus rex and the low calls of giant sauropods were gone forever. The few survivors were small and resourceful. They were the creatures that could hide from the initial devastation, perhaps by burrowing underground or seeking shelter in caves and deep water. They were also creatures with versatile diets, able to scavenge on the abundant carcasses, or eat the very fungi and insects that were now so common. Large animals with specialized diets had no chance. It was the age of the generalist, the small, and the lucky. It is a common misconception that all dinosaurs died on the very day the asteroid hit. While the vast majority perished in the immediate aftermath, It is likely that some small, isolated populations of non-avian dinosaurs clung to life for a time. Perhaps for months, years, or even a few thousand years, a handful of survivors might have eked out an existence in sheltered refuges. But their world was gone. The plants they ate were gone, the climate had turned against them, and the planet was no longer theirs. Eventually, inevitably, the very last of these magnificent creatures would have died, leaving the world to be inherited by the humble survivors of the apocalypse. When the darkness of the impact winter finally began to lift, as the dust slowly settled out of the atmosphere over several years, sunlight once again touched the Earth's surface. But the world it illuminated was profoundly changed. The diverse, complex forests of the Cretaceous were gone. In their place stood silent, empty landscapes that scientists sometimes call ghost forests. The dominant trees of the Old World, like many species of redwood and broadleaf trees, had been wiped out. The few trees that survived the fires and the freezing dark were hardy opportunists. For a long time, the world's forests were remarkably uniform, a far cry from the vibrant ecosystems of the past. The first plants to truly recover and dominate this new world were the ferns. Spores of ferns can lie dormant for long periods, waiting for the right conditions to return. As the sunlight and rains came back, they were among the first to sprout, covering the scarred land in a blanket of green. This initial recovery is so dramatic that geologists can see a fern spike in the rock layers just above the impact boundary. It was a world temporarily dominated by a single type of plant, a planet-wide fern prairie stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a simple ecosystem, but it was a vital first step in healing the wounded biosphere and restarting the process of life. Slowly, over thousands and tens of thousands of years, other plant groups began to stage a comeback. Conifers, those tough evergreen trees like pines and cypresses, were particularly successful. They were more resilient to the harsh, fluctuating climate than many of the flowering trees of the Cretaceous. For a time, vast, monotonous conifer forests spread across the continents, but another group was also waiting in the wings, the angiosperms, or flowering plants. Though they had taken a massive hit, the survivors possessed a key advantage. Their ability to reproduce quickly and spread their seeds via fruits and flowers would eventually allow them to outcompete the ferns and conifers. This recovery set the stage for the world we know today. As the climate gradually stabilized and warmed, flowering plants began to diversify at an explosive rate. They evolved new forms, new relationships with insect pollinators, and new ways to spread their seeds. They created more complex layered forest structures with dense undergrowth and a high canopy. This floral revolution created a wealth of new habitats and food sources. The rise of the flowering plants would directly fuel the rise of the animals that came to dominate this new era, from fruit-eating birds to leaf-browsing mammals. The green world was being reborn, and it was more vibrant than ever before. While the dinosaurs had been wiped from the face of the earth, their reptilian cousins proved to be remarkably resilient. In the quiet, empty world of the early Paleogene period, it was not the mammals that first rose to prominence. Instead, for a brief time, it was as if a second age of reptiles had dawned. Crocodilians, snakes, lizards, and turtles not only survived the extinction event, but thrived in its aftermath. Their success came down to a few key traits. They were cold-blooded, which meant they had slow metabolisms and needed far less food to survive than warm-blooded creatures. Many were also semi-aquatic, and rivers and swamps provided a crucial refuge from the worst of the impact's effects. Crocodilians were particularly well-suited to this new world. Their ability to lie dormant for long periods, their low energy needs, and their generalist diet of fish and scavenging made them perfect survivors. In the absence of large dinosaurs, they quickly became the apex predators in many ecosystems. Crocs like Borealisuchus could grow up to 15 feet long, patrolling the rivers and lakes of the recovering continents. Some groups, like the cebecids, were even adapted for life on land, becoming formidable terrestrial hunters. For millions of years after the dinosaurs were gone, the largest and most fearsome predator you were likely to encounter was a crocodile. Snakes also experienced a massive burst of diversification. Like crocodilians, their ability to survive on infrequent meals and shelter in burrows allowed them to weather the apocalypse. With their main competitors and predators gone, they expanded into new niches and grew to impressive sizes. Large constrictors, similar to modern boas, became common, some exceeding 10 feet in length. They were silent, efficient hunters in the recovering forests, preying on the small mammals and lizards that were beginning to repopulate the world. The world after the dinosaurs was a world filled with snakes, a testament to their incredible adaptability and survival skills. Lizards, too, found a world of opportunity. Groups like iguanas and monitor lizards spread far and wide. Without large dinosaurs to hunt them, monitor lizards became some of the top predators on land. They likely reached sizes comparable to the largest monitor lizards alive today, using their intelligence and keen senses to hunt for eggs, small animals, and carrion. The survival of these reptile groups demonstrates a key principle of evolution. It is not always the strongest or the biggest that survive a catastrophe, but those best able to adapt to a radically changed world. For a time, the planet belonged to them once more. Among all the survivors of the Great Extinction, one group stands out as perhaps the most successful of all: the turtles. While mammals saw only a fraction of their species make it through, an astonishing 80% of all turtle species from the late Cretaceous survived into the new era, the Cenozoic. They weathered the apocalypse better than almost any other group of vertebrates. Their victory was not one of speed or strength, but of patience, resilience, and a truly remarkable design. Their shells, of course, provided excellent physical protection, but their true secret to survival lay in their unique physiology and lifestyle, which were perfectly, if accidentally, suited to enduring a global catastrophe. The key to the turtles' success was their incredibly slow metabolism. Being cold-blooded, they require very little energy to live. A turtle can go for months or even a year or more without eating a single meal. In a world where food chains had completely collapsed and starvation was the norm, this ability was a superpower. While other animals desperately searched for sustenance, turtles could simply wait. They could burrow into the mud at the bottom of a pond or river, enter a state of suspended animation, and wait for the bad times to pass. The darkness, the cold, and the lack of food were challenges they were biologically built to overcome. Their habitats also provided a crucial buffer against the devastation. Many turtles were aquatic or semi-aquatic, living in freshwater rivers, lakes, and ponds. These aquatic environments were insulated from the worst of the effects. The searing heat pulse from the impact would have been less intense underwater, and the water would have offered protection from the subsequent freezing temperatures of the impact winter. While the terrestrial world was a barren wasteland of ash and death, the freshwater ecosystems, though damaged, remained a viable refuge for life. Here, turtles could find shelter and scavenge on the detritus and decaying matter that washed into the waterways. As life began to recover, turtles were everywhere. They were abundant, diverse, and a fundamental part of the new ecosystems. They filled numerous roles, from herbivores munching on the recovering water plants to carnivores preying on fish and invertebrates. Their sheer numbers also made them a vital food source for the other survivors that were beginning to thrive, especially the newly dominant crocodilians. The turtle's story is a powerful reminder that in the grand sweep of evolution, survival is the ultimate prize. They were not the flashiest or the fiercest, but their humble, patient, and durable nature made them the unlikely champions of the extinction. For over 150 million years, mammals had lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs. They were mostly small, nocturnal creatures, scurrying through the undergrowth, really no larger than a badger. But then, the asteroid changed everything. The extinction of the dinosaurs opened up a world of possibilities, vacating ecological niches that had been occupied for what felt like an eternity. For the first time, mammals had the space to grow, to diversify, and to finally step out into the daylight. While reptiles may have been the first to dominate, it was the mammals that would ultimately inherit the Earth. Their rise was not immediate and explosive, but more of a quiet and steady radiation into the empty spaces left behind. The mammals that survived were, like the other survivors, small and adaptable. They were likely burrowers or semi-aquatic, able to hide from the initial disaster. Many were generalists, capable of eating insects, seeds, and carrion, basically whatever they could find in the desolate landscape. Groups like the multituberculates, which were an extinct lineage of rodent-like mammals and early marsupials, were among the survivors. In the first few 100,000 years after the impact, most mammals were still quite small, maybe the size of a rat or a cat. But for the first time in their history, there was no giant predator waiting to snatch them up. The world was theirs for the taking. Soon, a new and formidable group of mammals appeared, the mesonychids. These were some of the first mammals to take on the role of large predators. Appearing almost immediately after the extinction, they looked something like a cross between a wolf and a hyena, but they were not actually related to either. They were a type of carnivorous hoofed mammal, with powerful jaws and large heads. Genera, like Disacus, which was about the size of a coyote, spread across North America, Europe, and Asia, becoming one of the top land predators of their time. Larger mesonychids, like the bear-sized Ankylodon, evolved powerful, bone-crushing bites, showing that mammals were quickly adapting to fill the vacant niche of apex predator. Another group of carnivorous mammals, the hyenodonts, also began their rise. These were more closely related to modern carnivorans like cats and dogs. In the early days after the extinction, they were still relatively small, no larger than a modern fox. But they possessed key advantages, including highly specialized shearing teeth and a superior sense of smell. Though they started small, the hyenodonts were on a trajectory to greatness. In the millions of years that followed, they would outcompete the mesonychids and produce some of the largest terrestrial carnivores the world has ever seen, some growing even larger than a polar bear. The quiet scurrying in the undergrowth was over, the age of mammals had truly begun. The skies of the Cretaceous period had been ruled by the pterosaurs, those magnificent flying reptiles with wingspans that could rival a small airplane. Like their dinosaur cousins on the ground, they were completely wiped out by the extinction event. In the immediate aftermath, the skies fell silent and empty, save for the wind and the falling ash, but as the planet began to heal, life returned to the air. The first to reclaim this domain were the insects. Having survived the catastrophe in their larval stages in soil or fresh water, they were among the first animals to recover. Butterflies in particular seem to have diversified quickly, flitting through the recovering fern prairies and forests. The birds, the direct descendants of dinosaurs, had a very close call. Only a handful of bird lineages managed to survive the extinction. The survivors were likely small, ground-dwelling birds, perhaps similar to modern quails or tinamous. Their ability to eat seeds, which could lie dormant in the soil for years, may have been their saving grace. While the great forests and the insects they supported were gone, a buried seed bank offered a reliable food source that saw them through the darkest times. All of the incredible diversity of birds we see today, from hummingbirds to eagles to penguins, descend from these few humble survivors. Their recovery, however, was slow. It would take another 15 million years for them to fully reclaim the skies. When birds did begin to diversify, they did so in spectacular fashion. With the land cleared of large dinosaurs, some birds abandoned flight altogether and evolved to become giant terrestrial predators. In Europe and North America, there was Gastornis. This formidable bird stood over 6 feet tall with a massive, powerful beak. For a long time, scientists believed it was a fearsome predator, a so-called terror bird of the early Cenozoic. More recent evidence suggests its beak may have been better suited for cracking nuts and tough plant material, making it more of a giant herbivore. Regardless of its diet, it was one of the largest animals on the landscape, a true giant of its time. On other continents, true terror birds did evolve. In South America, which was an isolated island continent for much of this time, birds of the forest wracid family became the undisputed apex predators. These were fast-running, flightless carnivores with huge, hooked beaks designed for striking and killing. They ranged from 3 feet tall to colossal giants standing nearly 10 feet high. They were the true inheritors of the predatory dinosaur niche, ruling their continent for millions of years. The skies and the land were being repopulated, and it was the dinosaurs' own surviving children who were leading the charge in many parts of the world. The devastation was not limited to the land. The oceans too suffered a terrible blow. The giant marine reptiles that had dominated the Mesozoic seas, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, vanished completely. The ammonites, shelled relatives of squid that had filled the oceans for hundreds of millions of years, were also almost entirely wiped out, with only a few small populations clinging to life for a short time. The collapse of the marine food web, starting with the death of plankton in the dark surface waters, emptied the oceans of their top predators. But just as on land, this emptiness created an opportunity for a new group to rise to the top. The new rulers of the ocean were the sharks. Sharks had been around for hundreds of millions of years, surviving multiple mass extinctions, and they proved their resilience once again. An incredible 25 out of 28 Mesozoic shark families swam right through the extinction event and into the new era. With their giant reptilian competitors gone, they faced an ocean of opportunity. One genus in particular, Otodus, a type of mackerel shark, quickly began to evolve to fill the vacant apex predator niche. Within just a million years, a blink of an eye in geological time, species of Otodus were growing to the size of a large great white shark, becoming the new terrors of the deep. This was just the beginning of a golden age for sharks. The Otodus lineage would continue to grow over the next few tens of millions of years, eventually culminating in the largest and most powerful predatory fish of all time, the megalodon. But even in the earliest days after the dinosaurs, sharks were already asserting their dominance. Other survivors included the ancestors of modern nurse sharks and sand tiger sharks. The seas were also home to other strange and wonderful survivors like the giant ghost shark Adaptant, a bizarre fish over 11 feet long with powerful tooth plates for crushing shells, which for a time was a top predator in its own right. Other fish also diversified in this new ocean. Eels and predatory cutlass fish became much more common. Near the impact crater itself, fossils of a strange armored trumpet-like fish named Xylolamprus have been found, showing that even at ground zero, life was surprisingly quick to return and evolve into new forms. The oceans, like the land, were being refilled. The cast of characters had changed dramatically, with the great reptiles replaced by giant sharks and a burgeoning variety of fish. The stage was set for the evolution of the marine ecosystems that we know today, including the eventual return of mammals to the sea in the form of whales and dolphins. The asteroid impact of 66 million years ago was one of the most destructive events in the history of life on Earth. It brought an end to the 160 million year reign of the dinosaurs and wiped out 3/4 of all living species in a planetary catastrophe of fire, darkness, and cold. The world was broken, sterilized, and silenced. For a time it was a planet of ash, ruled by fungi and decay. It is a stark reminder of how fragile life can be and how profoundly the history of our world can be changed in a single, terrible day. This event was a great reset, a moment that wiped the slate clean. Yet, from this devastation, life endured. It clung on in the deepest burrows, in the darkest rivers, and in the dormant seeds buried beneath the ash. The story of what happened next is not one of perpetual gloom, but one of incredible resilience and renewal. The survivors, though small and humble, were the founders of a new world. Ferns carpeted the land, preparing the way for new kinds of forests. Turtles and crocodiles, ancient lineages themselves, weathered the storm and thrived in the aftermath, becoming the new kings of the rivers and swamps. It was a world refashioned by the survivors, a testament to the sheer tenacity of life. This new world provided a grand stage for two groups in particular to rise to global prominence. In the oceans, the sharks, ancient and adaptable, seized the throne of the apex predator. On land, the mammals, after 150 million years of living in the shadows, finally had their moment. They stepped out into the light, growing larger, smarter, and more diverse than ever before. They evolved into new forms to fill every available niche, from tiny shrews to giant plant-eating wintotheres and fearsome predators like the hyenodonts. The dinosaurs' own descendants, the birds, also radiated, filling the skies and even producing their own terrestrial giants. The world we inhabit today is a direct consequence of that ancient catastrophe. Every forest, every grassland, every mammal, and every bird owes its existence to the opportunities that arose from the ashes of the Cretaceous. The rise of flowering plants, the dominance of mammals, and even the eventual evolution of our own species are all part of the long, intricate story that began when the dinosaurs' world ended. The dawn of this new era was born from destruction, but it flowered into a period of extraordinary creativity and diversification, ultimately giving rise to the beautiful, complex, and wonderful planet we know today.